Hello everyone, this is Cold Skin. Enjoy the show. In 1914, a young meteorologist named Friend sets off to a remote island in the Southern Ocean to replace a colleague. Captain Axel, noticing the passengers' anxious thoughts, pointed to a distant patch of land and said, "There's your island." Soon, the crew landed ashore. The sailors dutifully carried the luggage into an old hut that looked as though no one had lived there for years. Searching for the previous meteorologist, the captain escorted Friend to the lighthouse, all the while expressing his distrust of the island. To Friend's surprise, the exterior walls of the tower were surrounded by sharpened logs and stakes, as if the keeper had been meticulously preparing to defend his domain against an invasion. Unable to reach the owner, the men step inside and find a man named Gruner asleep. When Axel asks, "What happened to the previous meteorologist?" the man irritably replies that he died of typhus. Dissatisfied with the answer, the captain returns to the boat and bids Friend farewell. Over the next 12 months, Friend is left with monotonous, repetitive work recording, wind strength, and direction until the next employee takes over. With these thoughts, he returns to the cabin and begins unpacking his belongings, when his attention is caught by a logbook belonging to the previous meteorologist, Aldor Vigeland. Besides a photograph of Aldor's wife and ordinary sketches of various mollusks and fish, the pages of his journal contained drawings of strange creatures, marked with the cryptic note, "Darwin was wrong." The next morning, Friend began his work. Looking at the lighthouse through binoculars, he suddenly noticed a dark figure looming over the rampaging naked Gruner. It vanished almost immediately, and he dismissed it as a trick of his eyes. That night, creatures suddenly began pounding on his door. Fortunately, he managed to fend them off by driving a knife through the eye of one monster through a gap between the boards. Terrified, Friend spent the entire night hiding in the cellar. At dawn, he ran straight to the lighthouse, only to have Gruner refuse him entry, dumping a bucket of filth over him. Returning to the house, Friend had no choice but to prepare for the night's next attack. He nailed the windows shut and dug a small trench around the house, filling it with books and boards soaked in gasoline. In one of the boxes, he was lucky to find a rifle and a good supply of ammunition, giving him a sense of readiness for the coming battle with the monsters. As darkness fell, a whole pack of humanoid amphibians leapt from the water, furiously attacking the house. Friend tried to drive them off with gunfire, but when that failed, he decided to set the trench on fire. As expected, it scared the creatures away, but the blaze grew out of control and spread to the house. Friend had to flee outside and spend the night among the rocks, though fortunately the rain came and extinguished the fire. At sunrise, rifle in hand, Friend headed to the spring to ambush Gruner. He took cover in a small rock depression when suddenly a female amphibian leapt out at him. He almost shot her, but Gruner, keeping his rifle trained on Friend, stopped him. Seeing an opportunity, Friend offered Gruner part of his supplies in exchange for shelter in the lighthouse. Gruner agreed, calling him a friend, and then showed that the creature was completely harmless. It became clear that Gruner used her for his own pleasures and kept her nearby as a sort of pet. Later, the two men gather and carry the supplies into the tower, and Friend suddenly realizes that his predecessor didn't die from illness at all. Sometime after, Friend wakes up to find the amphibian licking the wound on his arm he got during the fire. According to Gruner, he was unconscious for 2 days, which sparks a small argument between the men. Friend wants to leave, but Gruner insists it's impossible. The island is far from any shipping routes, and the next vessel to arrive will be the one bringing the next replacement. Friend shifts his attention to the amphibian, genuinely amazed at how many unique species might still be unknown to science. This particular creature appears friendly and is unlike the ones that attacked his house at night, but Gruner warns him not to trust it, as it might harbor malicious intentions. As darkness falls, the caretaker tells Friend to take up the rifle and prepare for battle, giving him instructions on the best ways to confront the sea creatures. Suddenly, the tamed amphibian starts making strange noises, and hordes of its kin rush toward the tower. Gruner begins shooting at them while Friend freezes in shock and loses consciousness. The next morning, frustrated by the young man's ineffectiveness, Gruner revives him and sends him to the spring for water. The hero is dejected and racked with guilt, prompting Gruner to declare that he has only one chance left. That night, when the creatures attacked the lighthouse again, the man suddenly stepped aside and closed the door behind Friend, leaving him outside to face the sea monsters alone. By morning, to everyone's surprise, Gruner found the meteorologist alive and unharmed, though covered in alien blood. From that moment on, the two men developed a sort of coexistence. Each night they repelled the amphibian attacks, and by day, they rested and replenished their water supplies. They lived like this for several months, and eventually, the attacks ceased. Friend speculated that perhaps the amphibians had been assaulting the lighthouse because of the strange howls of the female he began calling Aneris. He grew curious why she allowed them to kill her own kind, to which Gruner confidently replied that he would exterminate them all. One day, while walking along the shore, Friend came across the remains of a whale and decided to take a bone with him for his craft projects. That evening, during a game of chess, the meteorologist suggested to Gruner that they capture one of the amphibians to send back to Britain for research. But suddenly, after a long pause, the lighthouse was attacked again. This time, the creatures were too many, and the men quickly ran out of ammunition. The enemy pressed on, forcing them to retreat to the spotlight room and barricade themselves inside. During the escape, Gruner's leg was torn, and to distract himself, he began to sing while watching the sea creatures attempt to break through the glass panel. At the first rays of sunlight, the amphibians left them in peace and vanished into the depths. Aneris began licking her master's wound, while Friend assessed the situation and realized that they wouldn't survive another attack. Not long after, he spotted a ship passing near the island and wanted to signal for help, but Gruner knocked him down before he could launch the flare. Unexpectedly, Aneris stepped in to protect Friend and was later severely beaten by Gruner for it. To comfort the frightened creature, Friend gave her a small boat carved from bone. Afterwards, Aneris led him to a remote spot where an old rowboat lay. Friend immediately returned to the lighthouse to inform Gruner about the discovery, only to find out that the keeper had already known about it. The boat belonged to smugglers transporting dynamite. The sailors had tried to escape the wreck, but were devoured by sea monsters. Friend then convinced Gruner to let him use an old diving suit so he could retrieve the cargo from the sunken vessel, but Gruner initially called it pure suicide. In the end, he changed his mind, and the two of them set off together toward the shipwreck. Friend explained to the old man that he would use a rope as a means of communication, then dove into the water. After lifting several crates from the seabed, he suddenly noticed a pair of juvenile amphibians. Startled, he quickly removed the heavy diving suit and surfaced. Back at the shelter, the men inspected the crates and found that only one contained usable dynamite. They then devised a plan to eliminate as many creatures as possible, laying 2 lines of explosives. However, that night, no attack occurred. The next 3 weeks passed in silence, and Gruner began to lose patience. Believing that Aneris had warned her kind of the danger, he began to beat her brutally. When Friend tried to intervene, Gruner declared that they would set an ambush for the monsters. That very night, the keeper dragged the amphibian outside and forced her to call her kin, leaving Friend to guard the open door. Soon, the first creatures appeared, and after fending one off, Friend rushed to the upper floor. The sea creatures attacked the lighthouse in great numbers, but Gruner failed to detonate the dynamite at first due to faulty connections, which Friend had to rewire. Soon, a massive explosion rocked the structure, stunning the men and annihilating nearly all the amphibians. The men only regained consciousness at dawn, and once recovered, they went out to finish off the severely wounded. Gruner used a spear, instructing Friend to conserve ammunition, but the meteorologist could not bring himself to kill a dying amphibian. Noticing a necklace around the creature's neck, he suddenly realized that these were not mere beasts, but a civilized species. Gruner did not appreciate the remark. In a fit of anger, he snatched the necklace and threw it into the ocean. That same night, Gruner and Friend heard Aneris and her kin mourning the fallen, and then they vanished. The old man decided to reveal to Friend that many years ago he had rescued the young Aneris from fishermen's nets, and now he was certain she would eventually return to him. Friend feels a deep sense of guilt, while Gruner shows not an ounce of remorse for what they have done. The next morning, the young man arranges a circle of stones on the shore, similar to those he had seen upon arriving on the island, and places the little carved bone boat in the center, hoping to communicate with Aneris. Meanwhile, Gruner prepares for another battle, insisting they must continue to instill fear in the creatures. Later, when the drunken old man falls asleep, Friend begins tidying up and accidentally discovers an old wedding photo among Gruner's belongings. Beside Gruner stands the same woman seen in the photograph found in the hut. Suddenly, Friend realizes that his predecessor, Aldor Vigeland, who supposedly died of typhus, is in fact Gruner himself. That evening, Friend goes to the shore and sees a young amphibian approaching, followed by a more confident and assertive Aneris along with her kin. They seek peace and do not attack, but Gruner refuses. He threatens her with his rifle, ordering her to return, and when she refuses, he goes back to the lighthouse and fires a signal rocket at the small creature, killing it. Determined to stop the deranged old man, Friend attacks him, but Gruner proves stronger. As he raises his axe, Friend shouts his true name, declaring that he is not a killer. Gruner suddenly falls silent. Then, tearfully repeating the word love 3 times, steps outside to gaze at the stars one last time before being torn apart by the sea creatures. Months later, a new meteorologist arrives to replace Friend. The captain mistakenly calls him Gruner, and the young man chooses not to correct him, stating that Friend died of typhus. In this way, he takes up the position of the previous keeper, choosing to remain on the island, far from the newly erupted World War. And here awaits even more stories. Subscribe, it's always intriguing with us. See you soon.